He thought owning a saloon would give him a fresh start, a place of laughter, cards, and whiskey. But when the massive widows of Outlaws cornered him and said, "You're not leaving until we all carry sons," it left only one question: had he gained a business, or stepped into a destiny ruled by their fierce demands? The wind that blew across Gallows Bend carried more dust than promise, but to Rowan Hale it smelled like freedom. After years of drifting from one cattle job to another, the weary cowboy had scraped together just enough to buy the shuttered saloon at the edge of town. Its swinging doors creaked in the dry wind, paint peeled, and windows clouded with grime. But to him, it wasn't just another building, it was a chance to start over. Rowan dismounted his horse, tied the reins to the post, and stood back to take in his new claim. A faded sign above the doorway read, "The Widow's Rest." The name made his skin prickle. Locals had muttered about it when he signed the papers, their voices dropping as if the place itself were listening. He shrugged it off. A man didn't get far in the West if he let gossip steer him. Inside, the saloon smelled of dust, whiskey long dried, and secrets left to rot. The bar was scarred with knife cuts, the floorboards warped from years of brawls and spilled drink. Rowan lit a lamp, its glow casting long shadows against the walls. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a smile. He could picture the tables polished, the shelves restocked, music filling the air again. Maybe this place could be his salvation. But then the floorboards creaked behind him. Rowan froze, hand drifting toward the Colt at his hip. He turned slowly, expecting a drunk squatter or a thief. Instead, the lamplight caught something far more unsettling. They were women, towering women, their frames so broad and tall they seemed to blot out the doorframe. The first stepped forward, her dark shawl falling from her shoulders to reveal arms corded with muscle. Behind her, two more followed, their boots heavy against the wood. Rowan's fingers tightened on the grip of his pistol. "Saloon's closed," he said evenly. "You'll have to come back when I'm open for business." The first woman's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. Her voice was deep, carrying the weight of command. "This place was never yours to buy, stranger. You've stepped into the house of the widows." The other two flanked her, eyes glinting with something that wasn't mere curiosity. One cracked her knuckles, the other leaned casually against the bar, as if she already owned it. Rowan's heart thudded, but he held his ground. "I paid for this saloon, signed papers and all. If you've got a problem, take it up with the land office." The leader laughed, a sound low and dangerous. "Papers mean nothing here. This saloon belonged to our husbands, men who carved their names in blood across this territory. They may be gone, but we remain." The second widow stepped closer, her height forcing Rowan to look up. "You think you'll just run this place? Pour drinks, count coins, and walk free?" She leaned in, her breath hot with menace. "You're not leaving until every one of us carries sons." The lamplight flickered, and Rowan felt the weight of the trap closing in. His dream of freedom had turned into a cage. If you're already hooked by this chilling twist, drop a comment below. Would you stand your ground like Rowan, or run while you still could? Rowan's grip on his Colt never wavered, though his stomach tightened as if the air had gone sour. He had faced outlaws before, men with scars and guns and reputations that traveled faster than their bullets. But these women were something different. Their presence filled the room in a way no armed gang ever had, a heavy mix of grief, strength, and menace. The leader stepped forward, boots echoing on the warped boards. She was taller than Rowan by a full head, her broad shoulders wrapped in a weathered duster. A thin scar traced down her cheek, vanishing into her jawline. "I'm Mara Crow," she said, her name rolling off her tongue like a warning. "Widow of Silas Crow, the Black Canyon butcher." You've heard the name. Rowan had. The Crow gang's reputation was carved into the lawman reports he'd seen posted across half the territories. Men who robbed trains, burned homesteads, and vanished into the canyons like smoke. Mara's gaze was cold enough to freeze a man mid-step. She gestured behind her. That's Eliza Brand, widow of Jeb Brand, he who gunned down 3 sheriffs in one night, and Clara Vex, wife to the fastest knife south of Arkansas. The 2 widows nodded once, like judges confirming a sentence. Rowan's throat felt dry, but he forced his voice steady. Your men are dead. Whatever blood they spilled died with them. This saloon was sold fair and clean. Mara's laugh was bitter. Sold by men who never dared step through those doors. They know better. This saloon is a shrine to the fallen. And now, she leaned close, eyes boring into his. It is a womb, waiting to be filled. You'll give us sons, strong sons, and only then will you leave. The words struck harder than any fist. Rowan drew a slow breath, his hand resting firm on his Colt but not lifting it. He knew the mistake in drawing too quickly. He wasn't staring down 3 drunks, but 3 women who looked ready to rip the gun from his grip before he cleared the leather. I didn't ride to Gallows Bend to be anyone's prisoner, he said. I came for peace. A man's right is to own his business, and I won't be told otherwise. Eliza smirked, stepping around him to the bar. She ran a finger along the dusty counter, leaving a clean streak. Peace? She said. You think there's peace in this place? Men died here. Their ghosts drink in these walls. She turned, her voice sharper. Peace is for the weak. We want a legacy. Clara spoke for the first time, her tone almost playful. You'll learn soon enough. Every man who's crossed us has either fed the earth or fed our cause. Rowan's muscles coiled, but he stayed still. This was a game of patience now. He couldn't outfight 3 giants alone. Mara finally straightened, her shadow stretching across him. The choice isn't yours, Hale. You belong to us, and you'll learn to kneel. As the widows turned to leave, Rowan exhaled slowly, his mind already racing. Escape was no longer a matter of when, only how. Morning came harsh and unforgiving, the sun painting Gallows Bend in tones of copper and rust. Rowan Hale stepped out of the widow's rest with a mind heavy from the night's encounter. He hadn't slept much. The words of Mara Crow still echoed like a gunshot in his ears. You belong to us. The town looked ordinary at first glance. Wooden storefronts, the blacksmith hammering sparks into the morning air, children chasing each other along the dusty street. Yet when Rowan's boots hit the boardwalk, he noticed the way conversations dipped, how eyes darted away. Folks weren't curious about the new saloon owner. They were wary. He tied back his coat, letting the handle of his Colt show plain, then walked toward the general store. Inside, the shelves were lined with flour, beans, and the usual supplies. A thin man behind the counter cleared his throat nervously when Rowan approached. You're the one who took over the widow's rest, the shopkeep said. His tone carried no welcome. That's right, Rowan replied. Name's Hale. The man's gaze flicked to the door, then back. Best be careful calling it yours. Folks say nothing in that place belongs to the living. Rowan frowned. I heard enough whispers. What truth sits behind them? The shopkeep hesitated, as if speaking might summon something. Finally, in a low voice he said, Those women, they ain't like the rest of us. Bigger than most men, strong as oxen, and meaner than rattlers. When the Crow gang was cut down, the widows stayed, claimed their husbands' shadows still guarded them. Some think they killed more men after their outlaws died than before. Rowan's jaw tightened. Then why does no one stand up to them? Because every man who tried to wound up gone, the shopkeeper whispered. Vanished. No graves, no markers, just gone. And the rest of us, well, we've got families to feed. We keep our heads down. Leaving the store with a sack of supplies, Rowan stepped into the dusty street again. 2 ranch hands leaned against a hitching post, speaking in hushed tones. Their words carried just enough for him to catch. Remember when Sheriff Klein rode in, said he'd clean up the widow's mess, one muttered. 3 days later, his horse came back without him, the other replied. Both men glanced at Rowan before lowering their eyes. At the livery, the old stableman gave a crooked smile when Rowan asked about Hay. "Careful, son. These women set their sights on you, didn't they?" Rowan didn't answer, but the silence was enough. The stableman nodded slowly. "Best advice? Don't fight 'em head on. They're not just strong, they're clever. They know this town fears them, and they know how to use it." As Rowan walked back toward the Widow's Rest, the street seemed to shrink around him. The whispers followed, weaving a net of dread, every door half shut, every window's curtain twitching. The widows didn't just haunt the saloon, they owned the town's silence. Rowan clenched his fists. He wasn't ready to kneel, not to outlaws and not to their widows. If Gallows Bend was too scared to fight, then he'd fight alone. By evening, the Widow's Rest was stirring back to life, though not in the way Rowan Hale had hoped. He had spent the day clearing cobwebs, dusting shelves, and convincing himself the place could be his. Yet every sweep of the broom was interrupted by the echo of voices, those towering women claiming him like he was stock to be branded. The sun dipped low when the doors creaked open without warning. Mara Crow strode in first, her shadow stretching long across the warped floorboards. Eliza Brand and Clara Vex followed close behind, their heavy steps shaking dust from the rafters. Rowan straightened behind the bar, his Colt resting hidden but near. "You cleaned it up," Mara observed, eyes narrowing as she studied the shelves. "Good, keep it that way." Rowan poured a glass of water, steadying his voice. "I'm not here to serve you. This saloon is mine now, and I'll run it my way." Eliza's laugh rolled through the room like thunder. She stepped forward, lifting a whiskey barrel as if it weighed no more than a loaf of bread. With a grunt, she hurled it across the room. The cask smashed against the far wall, exploding into shards of wood. Liquor soaked the boards, the smell sharp and heavy. Rowan's hand twitched toward his gun, but he didn't draw. Clara moved next. She plucked a steel poker from the fireplace and, without a word, bent it into a horseshoe between her hands. The metal screeched, then sagged into submission. She tossed the twisted iron onto the bar, letting it land inches from Rowan's elbow. "Understand now?" she asked, voice lilting like a taunt. "Your pistol won't make you taller, won't make you stronger." Rowan met her eyes, refusing to flinch. "Strength doesn't mean right." Mara stepped close, towering over him. Her breath carried the faint burn of whiskey. "Right?" she echoed. "Our husbands carved their right with bullets and knives. We kept it with blood, and now you'll help us keep it alive." Her hand slammed onto the bar, the wood splintering beneath her palm. Rowan felt the tremor travel up his arms, but he forced himself to stand steady. "You think you're free," Mara continued, her gaze locking onto him. "But in this saloon, freedom's a lie. You're ours until you've sired enough sons to replace the men this town stole from us." The words were a noose tightening around his throat. Yet Rowan caught something in her eyes, a flicker of desperation hidden beneath the iron mask. These weren't just threats born of cruelty. They were born of need. Eliza leaned against the wall, smirking. "Best get comfortable, Hale. You'll find the Widow's Rest has long arms. Ask the sheriff. Ask the preacher." They all learned to keep quiet. The three women turned to leave, their laughter booming in the hollow space. Rowan stood rooted, staring at the twisted poker on the bar. The message was clear. They didn't just control him, they controlled the whole town. But Rowan Hale had weathered worse storms. He whispered to himself as the doors swung shut. "If they think I'll break, they picked the wrong man." Rowan Hale lasted one more night in the Widow's Rest, before the walls felt like a coffin closing around him. He woke before dawn, packed his saddlebags with what little he owned, and slipped quietly toward the stable. His plan was simple: ride out before the town stirred, vanish into the desert, and leave Gallows Bend to its ghosts. But as he reached for his horse's reins, a voice rumbled from the shadows. "Going somewhere, mister?" Rowan spun, hand on his Colt, only to see Eliza Brand leaning against a post, arms crossed. Even in the dim light she looked massive, her outline filling the doorway. "Heading for a ride?" Rowan said evenly. Her smirk was slow and mocking. "Ride ends where we say. You belong to the widows now. Don't think you can slip the rope." Before Rowan could reply, two townsmen appeared from the street. Ordinary folk, one a ranch hand, the other the blacksmith's boy, but both froze at Eliza's glare. They nodded respectfully to her, avoiding Rowan's eyes, then hurried past. The message was plain. No one would defy the widows, not even for a stranger. Rowan untied his horse anyway, leading it out into the street. Eliza stepped aside, but her eyes burned like coals. "You can try," she said, "but you'll be back. They always come back." He mounted and rode hard through Gallows Bend, hoping to leave the weight of the saloon behind him. Yet with every hoofbeat, he noticed doors shutting, curtains drawn, heads ducking. It wasn't just fear, it was compliance. The whole town had been bent under the widow's will. At the far end of Main Street, Sheriff Dane Cutter leaned against his office porch. Rowan slowed his horse, relief flickering. "Sheriff," he called, "I need you to tell me if this town still belongs to the law." Cutter's face was pale in the dawn light. He chewed his lip before answering. "Law doesn't reach far here, Hale, not where they're concerned. Best not make trouble." "So you'll do nothing?" Rowan pressed. The sheriff's gaze shifted nervously toward the saloon. "Do what you want, but don't expect help. Men tried before you. They disappeared. I have no deputies left to bury more bodies." He turned and walked inside, the door closing firmly behind him. Rowan cursed under his breath and spurred his horse toward the open road. Dust rose behind him, the desert stretching wide and empty. But just beyond the last ridge, 3 riders appeared, Clara Vex among them, her long coat whipping in the wind. She raised a hand, signaling him to halt. The men flanking her weren't widows, but townsfolk pressed into service. Rowan stopped, Colt resting heavy in its holster. Clara's smile was razor-thin. "Told you, stranger. You don't leave Gallows Bend unless we say so." The desert yawned wide, but Rowan knew the truth. He wasn't free. Not yet. Gallows Bend wasn't just a town under their shadow, it was a cage, and he was locked inside. Rowan Hale returned to the Widow's Rest with a bitter taste in his mouth. His ride had proved what he already feared. The widow's reach stretched further than bullets. The town itself was their accomplice, shackled by fear. But if Rowan couldn't ride free, he would dig for answers. Somewhere in the bones of the saloon lay the reason these women clung to it like a tomb. That night, when the streets were quiet, Rowan pried open the trapdoor behind the bar. Dust spiraled into the lamplight. As he descended into the cellar, the air smelled of mildew and old whiskey. But what caught his eye wasn't the barrels stacked along the walls. It was a chest shoved against the far corner, its lock long rusted. With the butt of his Colt, Rowan broke it open. Inside lay a heap of relics, blood-stained bandanas, tarnished revolvers, and faded wanted posters. He unfolded one carefully. Silas Crow, wanted dead or alive. Murder, robbery, train heist. Another bore the name Jeb Brand. Another Miles Vex. Their faces stared back at him, grim reminders of men whose names once turned lawmen pale. At the bottom of the chest, Rowan found something stranger, a bundle of old journals wrapped in leather. He lit another lamp and flipped one open. The handwriting was jagged, the words soaked in arrogance. "Legacy must be carried on. Sons will inherit what bullets cannot take." Rowan read page after page entries that spoke of the gang's code. They believed their bloodline had to endure, that without sons their reign would vanish into dust. The journals weren't about love or family. They were about obsession, dominion. A floorboard creaked overhead. Rowan snapped the journal shut, Colt in hand. The trapdoor creaked open, and a shadow filled the stairwell. It was Mara Crow. Her massive frame descended step by step, her scar catching the light. "So," she said, voice thick with disdain, You've been digging in the graves of better men. Rowan didn't lower his weapon. Better? These weren't legends, they were butchers. They killed and stole until the law cut them down. And now you carry their madness. He held up the journal. This is why you chain yourselves to me? A superstition written by dying men? Mara's eyes glinted. Not superstition, destiny. Their blood cries for heirs, and we'll see it answered. You're not the first man brought here, Hale, but you're the one strong enough to survive it. Her words chilled him. Others had been taken. Men swallowed by silence. Rowan steadied his breath. Destiny or not, I won't bend to it. I'll die before I give you what you want. Mara's lips curled into a grim smile. Then perhaps death is the first step. She snatched the journal from his hand and strode back up the stairs, leaving Rowan in the cellar's dim glow. The trapdoor slammed shut, plunging him into darkness. Rowan clenched his fists. Now he understood. The widows weren't just clinging to grief, they were prisoners of a curse they'd chosen to believe. And unless he broke it, Gallows Bend would never let him go. The next morning, Rowan Hale emerged from the widow's rest with a plan brewing behind his weary eyes. The journals had made one thing clear. The widows weren't merely cruel. They were chained to a legacy they believed unbreakable. If brute force couldn't free him, then cunning would. He'd have to unravel them from the inside. He started small. When Mara, Eliza, and Clara entered the saloon at midday, expecting to find him cowed, Rowan greeted them with a steady grin. He poured 3 glasses of whiskey, sliding them down the bar with practiced ease. Thought you'd be too scared to serve us, Clara said, arching a brow. Rowan leaned casually against the counter. Scared men make poor barkeeps. I figure if I'm stuck, I might as well keep the glasses full. The remark earned a low chuckle from Eliza, though Mara's scarred face stayed carved in stone. Still, Rowan caught the flicker in their eyes' surprise that he hadn't crumbled overnight. In the days that followed, he worked carefully. He joked with townsfolk loud enough for the widows to hear, sowing the idea that he wasn't theirs to command. When the blacksmith stopped by for a drink, Rowan asked pointed questions about the Crow Gang, drawing out stories of their brutality in front of the widows. Each word chipped away at the polished myth of their husbands. At night, Rowan rehearsed lines like a gunslinger practices draws. He studied their rhythms, noting how Mara bristled at silence, how Eliza's temper flared at mockery, how Clara hid her nerves behind a smile. They were formidable, but they weren't unshakable. One evening, when Mara declared, "Your sons will carry the Crow name," Rowan met her gaze coolly and said, "Names don't carry weight, deeds do, and your husband's deeds are rotting in unmarked graves." The saloon fell deathly still. Mara's fist slammed onto the bar, cracking the wood. Eliza reached for her knife, but Rowan didn't flinch. Instead, he poured himself a drink and sipped it slow. "Kill me if you want," he said, "but then you'll have nothing. No sons, no legacy. Just 3 widows clinging to dust." For a long moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was the creak of the saloon's beams under the weight of silence. Then Clara gave a short, sharp laugh, though her eyes darted nervously toward Mara. "You've got nerve," she muttered. Rowan smirked, though his pulse hammered in his ears. He had pressed the line, and for now it held. That night, as he lay awake in his upstairs room, Rowan replayed the exchange in his head. He knew he couldn't keep needling them forever. Sooner or later, the widows would strike back harder than words. But every seed of doubt he planted was a crack in their armor. He whispered into the dark, "You want me broken, but I'll make you question everything first." The battle had begun, not with bullets, but with words sharp enough to wound. The widow's rest grew tense as a coiled snake. For days Rowan had needled the widows, pricking their pride with sharp words and calm defiance. The town whispered of it, some secretly cheering, others shaking their heads, certain he was digging his own grave. By the time the saloon lamps burned low one stormy night, the air was thick with the sense that something was bound to break. Rowan sat at the bar, polishing a glass that didn't need polishing. His Colt rested nearby, but his hands stayed loose, steady. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he knew it was walking through the door. It came in the form of Eliza Brand. She shoved the saloon doors open so hard they slammed against the walls, rattling the windows. Behind her strode Mara and Clara, their long coats dripping with rain. The storm outside seemed to follow them in, thunder rolling close on their heels. "You've grown bold, Hale," Mara growled, striding up to the bar. "Too bold." Rowan set down the glass, meeting her glare. "Bold's the only way to live when three giants think they own you." The room went still. Even the rain seemed to pause against the windows. Then Eliza snarled and grabbed the nearest table, flipping it onto its side with such force that mugs and cards scattered like leaves in a gale. "Enough!" she shouted. "We'll teach you what happens when a man forgets his place." Clara was quicker. She lunged across the room, knife flashing. Rowan ducked, the blade slicing a lock of hair as he rolled behind the bar. His hand closed on the Colt, but he didn't fire. He knew bullets might not be enough to stop them, and wasting them would only prove his desperation. Instead, he snatched a bottle of whiskey, shattered it against the counter, and thrust the jagged glass outward. Clara froze, eyes narrowed, knife poised. "You think glass will save you?" she hissed. "No," Rowan said coolly, "but it'll slow you down." Mara moved next, faster than her size suggested. She grabbed a chair and hurled it over the bar. Rowan ducked again as wood splintered against the shelves. Bottles rained down, liquor spilling across the floor. The smell of whiskey mixed with the crack of thunder. Rowan popped up from cover, aiming the Colt at the ceiling. He fired once. The shot echoed like a cannon blast, shaking dust from the rafters. The widows stilled, surprised by the sudden roar. "Go ahead," Rowan shouted over the ringing silence. "Burn me, break me, tear me apart. But the whole town's listening now, and they'll hear who really rules Gallows Bend. Not the Crow Gang, not their ghosts, just three widows too afraid to let go of the dead." For the first time, Mara hesitated. Eliza's rage flickered. Clara's knife wavered. Rowan had struck not with lead, but with truth, and it rattled them harder than any bullet. The storm raged outside, but inside the saloon, another storm had begun, and Rowan knew this fight was far from finished. The storm passed by dawn, but inside the widow's rest, tension still hung heavy as gunsmoke. Broken chairs littered the floor, and shards of glass glittered in the lamplight. Rowan Hale sat slumped at a table, bruised but unbroken, while the widows watched him with eyes full of fury, and something else he hadn't seen before: doubt. Mara Crow leaned against the bar, scarred cheek twitching as though she were holding back words. Clara Vex paced like a caged cougar, her knife flipping end over end in her palm. Eliza Brand sat silent in the corner, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. Rowan finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "You think you honor your husbands with this madness, but I've read their words. Their journals weren't about love or family. They were about fear of being forgotten. Men like them wanted to live forever, and they shackled you with their dying dreams." Clara stopped pacing. "Lies!" she snapped, though her voice wavered. Rowan pulled a crumpled page from his coat and slapped it onto the table. Mara stiffened. The handwriting was unmistakable. Silas Crow's jagged scrawl. Rowan read aloud, "Without sons, we are nothing. Without blood to carry us, our names turn to dust." He looked each widow in the eye. "That's not destiny, that's desperation. You've been killing yourselves trying to raise ghosts that should have stayed buried." The room was silent, but for the groan of the saloon's rafters. Rowan pressed on. "You talk of legacy. Let me tell you about legacy. A man's worth isn't measured by blood, it's measured by what he leaves behind. And your men?" His voice sharpened. "They left fear. They left ashes. That's no legacy, it's a curse." Eliza's face twisted. but not in anger. Something in her hardened expression cracked. Her husband, Jeb Brand, had been known for his brutality, and Rowan's words pierced through the iron shell she'd built around that truth. Mara slammed her hand onto the table, rattling the broken glass. Enough. You think words can unmake blood oaths? You don't understand what binds us. Rowan leaned forward, unflinching. I understand better than you. You've built your whole lives on the lies of men who died like dogs, and deep down, you know it. Clara's knife slipped from her hand, clattering onto the floor. She stared at Rowan, her breath uneven. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked small. Her towering frame bowed under the weight of disbelief. Rowan seized the moment. You can keep clinging to graves, or you can face the truth. The Crow gang's gone. Their bloodline ended with them. You're not widows of kings, you're prisoners of ghosts. Mara's eyes burned with rage, but Eliza's shoulders sagged. Clara wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. The unity that had made them unshakable was fracturing, hairline cracks spreading through their foundation. Rowan knew then, their strength had never been in muscle alone. It had been in belief, and belief could be broken. The widow's rest felt like a powder keg, every breath one spark away from detonation. Rowan Hale stood at the center of it, bruised, weary, but steady, while the three widows loomed around him. The cracks he had driven into their unity spread wider with every heartbeat. Mara Crow clung to rage like a lifeline. Her fists were clenched, jaw set, eyes blazing with the fire of a woman who refused to surrender. You think you can break us with words? She growled. You think truth makes you stronger than blood? Rowan's hand hovered near his Colt. Truth outlives blood, he said, and yours has run dry. Eliza Brand shifted uneasily. Her eyes, once fierce, now carried shadows of doubt. The myths of her husband, Jeb, clashed with the memories she could no longer bury. Mara, she said quietly, maybe he's right. Maybe we've been chasing ghosts. Mara rounded on her, fury spilling like a flood. Don't you dare falter. Without sons, we're nothing. Without legacy, we're dust. Clara Vex stooped to retrieve her knife, but her hand trembled. I'm tired, Mara, she whispered. Tired of fighting shadows. What if he's telling the truth? What if this curse is nothing but a lie we kept feeding? The air crackled. The bond between the widows, once iron, was bending under the weight of Rowan's words. Mara sensed it, and desperation twisted her features. With a roar, she grabbed a broken chair leg and lunged at Rowan, swinging with all her towering strength. Rowan sidestepped, years of survival sharpening his reflexes. The chair leg smashed into the bar, splintering wood and sending shards flying. He drew his Colt, not to fire, but to hold steady at her chest. Don't make me, he warned. But Mara's rage drowned out reason. She charged again, eyes wild, scar burning red under the lamplight. Rowan fired once, not into her, but into the ceiling. The gunshot thundered through the saloon, raining plaster and dust. The shock stopped Mara mid-stride, her chest heaving. Rowan lowered the barrel slowly. Look around you, he said, voice cutting through the haze. Your fight's not with me. It's with the truth. Your husbands are gone. Their names rot on posters and in shallow graves. No sons will change that. Eliza finally broke. She sank into a chair, face buried in her hands. Clara dropped her knife, tears streaking her weathered cheeks. Only Mara stood trembling, her pride cracking like glass. You can't take it from me, she stammered. Rowan holstered his Colt. I didn't take anything. They left you with nothing, Mara. You've just refused to see it. For a long moment, the only sound was Mara's ragged breathing. Then, with a strangled cry, she hurled the chair leg aside and collapsed against the bar. The fight drained out of her, leaving only silence. Rowan stood tall, heart pounding but unbroken. The saloon was his again, not by deed alone, but by will. He stepped toward the doors, pushing them open to the pale dawn beyond. Freedom lay in the light. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.